So basically I'm just going to give you a bit of an update where we're at with our pre-breeding work around frost. This is definitely a very collaborative project. I work in the Department of Agriculture and Food. I also work with guys in the University of Adelaide in South Australia, Calyx, who run our trial site in Narrabri, and also obviously GRDC, who fund the vast majority of this work. Okay, so essentially the Australian National Frost Program, that's funny, I already checked this and it worked the first time. But the Australian National Frost Program's currently objective is to benchmark wheat and barley varieties for their susceptibility to frost. This is mainly funded by GRDC and it has 3 nodes. The southern node, which is run by the University of Adelaide, the West Australian node, which is run by me in the Department of Agriculture, and the northern node, which is run out of Narrabri with Calyx. So the Australian National Program has these 3 nodes. We use standard protocols across the 3 different sites, standard weather stations, and try and keep everything as consistent as we can across the 3 environments in terms of our phenotyping. And we also have a National Advisory Group which help oversee the National Frost Program and the research and the direction of what we're doing. A lot of this work is building on the results that I presented to you guys last year, and essentially this is some material which from some trials which I ran in Kivalling with the FACEY group from 2009, 10 and 11. And essentially what you're looking at is frost-induced sterility from early August through to early October for 3 different wheat varieties. And essentially there's a couple of things to point out. Early frost, when we get a lot of damage, there's not really any difference between the commercial varieties that we were running in these trials. They all had a lot of damage. But later on, towards middle of September, or early September, late September, when we had lower levels of damage, there was differences between the varieties. And in these trials, wild capture came out as being more susceptible consistently in these years, and also in 2011 at a site with lower frost severity. So the work that we're going on with really is about trying to expand and increase the capacity of this work. So there's the 3 nodes, Merredin, which you guys are familiar with, a moderate level of frost risk by national standards. Loxton, reasonable, higher level of frost risk, and compared to Narrabri, which is a more severe site. So our key message is really about what the benchmarking trials are about. So what we're really trying to do is to benchmark the variation in frost-induced sterility in the commercial wheat and barley varieties that you guys are growing. We want to make variety rankings to you guys available after 3 years worth of trial data, and anyone who went to the MDT talk this morning would have seen that we don't really want to give you information based on 1 year's worth of data. So we've got through 2012 and we're looking at 2013, we're planning for that and getting everything set up, and then 2014 as well. So really what we want to do is give you guys some better tools to how to manage your variety selection around frost. So you have some idea before you grow a variety how susceptible it is to frost compared to what you're already using. So the standardised methods have multiple sowing dates, essentially from mid-April through to late June to get our material flowering during this peak frosting window from July through to October. We tag heads after each frost event, and we physically go through and count the sterile florets in each of those heads, and generally at the moment we're counting around 70,000 heads a year. And these are just some quick snapshots of the level of damage or the variation that we're looking at. So this is some typical symptoms of damage we're picking up in barley and also across here in wheat. So the benchmarking trials have a total of about 65 entries in total. In West Australia I'm running 40, New South Wales is running 30, but there's about 20 varieties which are consistent across all of the trials, across all of the sites, and a similar story for barley, about 50 getting run in South Australia, 24 in WA and about 20 in New South Wales, and about another 18 which are run across all the 3 environments. So these varieties have been selected to be current material which you already understand well, and also material which will be released by the breeding companies in the next couple of years. So this is just some data from this year's trials from South Australia, WA and New South Wales, and this is just the canopy temperature during July, August and September, so it's the actual mean, the average, the minimum temperature during that period. And you can see South Australia had quite a few, 1, 2, 3, 5 different frost events. At Merredin in WA, we had some early on, and then that big one later on in the end of September. New South Wales, Narrabri, a lot more frost. You guys reckon you get frosted a lot. Fortunately, they can flower just after here. But I guess really that just highlights we've got a gradient in terms of severity across the different sites. And these are just some of the results from Merredin this year, from last year. You can see there's quite a range in the frost-induced sterility. So this is the grand total across all the different frost events that we've measured. I've just shown you this for simplicity compared to some commercial varieties which you guys have already understood well. So previously we've said that we get differences between wild catching and young, and we're still picking up that difference. We're getting Yippee somewhere here in the middle, Jance here, Gregory. This is a Durham line down the bottom. We already know that Durham's a lot more sensitive than a lot of the other bread wheats, but there's also the really interesting thing for me is, we thought wild catching was a sucker, but among the material that you guys potentially could be growing, there's a lot more material which is worse than wild catching. Saying that, there's still a lot more material which is up this end, and we really haven't explored that. The best line that's coming out not only in Western Australia but across all 3 environments is this synthetic AUS 30323, and we really haven't put that in an environment where we've given it enough stress to be able to pick up, to really test it. So there's some material here which has definitely got some potential, and there's populations being made with that and getting rescreened through the program. This is just a biplot of how the different environments correlate. So here you can see the West by different frost events. So WA1 is the first frost event that we tagged in West Australia, WA2 is the second frost event, South Australia 1, 2 and 3. But what you can pretty much see is that we're getting similar rankings of material in West Australia and South Australia. New South Wales, it's a bit different to these 2 sites. But essentially, we're getting good correlations between the 2 southern sites, WA and South Australia. New South Wales, we need to look at that a bit closely, but essentially it looks like it's working. Barley screening in Merredin last year, we really didn't have enough frost damage to give us a good screen in Merredin last year for barley. They had better results out of Loxton in South Australia, and I guess that's one of the benefits of having a national facility where you've got a spread of sites across such a large range, is that you might not get good results every year in one site, but across the 3 facilities we potentially will. But even at these lower levels of damage, we are picking up some pretty consistent differences between the commercial material. This YI3806 has a Japanese-derived source of frost tolerance in it and is currently going through yield evaluation. Where is that at now? Maybe we can have some comments about that later. But essentially, there is variation there, and there's some material which is looking better. And this is just the biplot of the different environments for barley, and you can see pretty much New South Wales and WA correlate quite well, in South Australia in a couple of the events. So, the results we're getting are reasonably consistent across sites and environments. We're getting good variation between the material, so it looks like the potential for developing a ranking system is there. There's also other work which is going on, which is about screening some alternative sources for frost tolerance. So here's Chengdao Lee from DAFWA in Loxton looking at some of the Tibetan material which has come in to the frost screening nursery at Loxton in South Australia. We're also doing some other work trying to revisit frost susceptible stages. So you're probably familiar with this plot where we're looking at serial susceptibility to frost damage, and we've got this big spike around from ear emergence through to anthesis, and essentially that correlates across to Z47 to 69 as the main susceptibility window. But we've also been doing some work in collaboration with CSIRO, just looking at the effect of cold. So taking freezing out of it, but just looking at the susceptibility of wild catching compared to young over different time courses. And essentially we're finding there's this window around mid-booting where they're also quite susceptible to cold under controlled conditions. So all of this really is, and what we, so the reason I've summed this really is what we see in the field is not only the effect of frost up at this end, but the effect of all of these cold events earlier on during development. And so the sterility you see from frost, that you report as frost, is not just from the single event you had here, it's a cumulative effect of everything that's happening during these sensitive stages all the way through. So maybe, you know, we need to push this window back a bit to also look at the effect of cold during this booting stages. There's also been doing some opportunistic work with grower groups when I've had a chance. This is some work that I've done with Gary Lang last year, where the FACER group was keen at looking at stubble burning and frost damage. And essentially we put in some temperature sensors. They burnt some landscape and left non-burnt sections in the landscape, both in the high part of the landscape with low frost risk and the lower part of the landscape with a higher frost risk. And you can see the average minimum temperature for the last 15 days in September. In the high part of the landscape where it was burnt was around 1 degree. The low part of the landscape where it was burnt was about -1. So that's the average temperature over those 15 days, with -1. Whereas in the high part of the landscape where they retained the stubble, it was also around -1. And the low part of the landscape where they retained the stubble was around -2. So essentially, you know, retaining stubble in this part of the landscape on this soil essentially made the whole part of the landscape as susceptible as the low part of the landscape when Gary retained stubble. And, you know, not only is the intensity different, the severity also kind of match up with that. We also went through and looked at frost-induced sterility, biomass and harvest index and yield. We still haven't really got the header yield together. Our GPS information is not good enough to do that, so we're revisiting that next week. But essentially, you know, I'm confident of the harvest index information. You can see essentially that retaining the stubble in the high part of the landscape, even though he produced more biomass, his yield really sucked. And that's mainly due to his harvest index was so low, he just got smashed. So I guess the reason I'm presenting this information to you is that, yes, there are genetic solutions and they're coming, but there's a shitload more going on at this management level that we need to look at further. So, back to my key messages. Variation in commercial wheat and barley is significant. The rankings from these should be available within the next couple of years. We have identified improved genetic sources of frost tolerance in both barley and the wheat, and this material has entered the breeding programs. Ongoing work is going to try and validate the relationship with yield with our current scoring methods, and also we're going to have to look at this interaction with management. Obviously, a lot of this work's not possible without all the key staff behind it. Particularly thanks go to my technicians in Meriden, the statisticians, and the research station staff. Also, other partners on the project, AGT, CSIRO, University of Adelaide collaborators, particularly Tim, Michael and Jason, mainly because he's here in the audience today. And definitely Calix and Narrabri, who really, you know, this is a new method, new phenotyping thing, not something that companies like Calix are used to doing, who are able to pick it up and give us really good data within the first year. Very impressive. Thanks a lot. And we've got time for a couple of questions.
Ben, have you got enough funding to do the work you like to do?
Great question. Like, I mean, the genetics work that we're doing, screening and validating the current material, like current commercial material, that's fine. Bringing in new sources, that funding's coming through. Where I see is the lack at the moment, which you guys probably saw as well, is in that management side.